Welcome to Imperialism in the Middle East and India Notes. We'll talk quickly about how imperialism affected the Middle East and India. Remember that you can stop or pause the video at any time that you need to. You can also backtrack if you miss something. Alright, imperialism is competition for land. Okay, so we're talking about how the Europeans, in particular, are going to be competing for territory in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. But one of the things that they use to figure out where to colonize is called geopolitics, which is officially an interest in or taking of land for its strategic location or products. So why are we going to go to certain areas of Africa and not others? Well, because of the products that they have or the location that would give us a benefit. Okay, so they want to get control of Egypt, which is part of the Ottoman Empire. So that way they can have control of this new thing that's being built called the Suez Canal. Or I think, for example, the Ottomans wanted Constantinople so that they could control trade on the Silk Route. Or if you look at the map of Africa, Belgium wants to get part of Congo right here because all of these little things, blue things, are diamond occurrences. The British want Sierra Leone for the diamonds, so that way it'll help make them a lot of money. So all of those places have diamonds. So just like I said, this connection between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea is going to be the Suez Canal, and that's going to be very valuable. And then Constantinople's up here with Turkey. This is a modern map, remember? And so that's going to be very valuable as well. Now, the Ottomans are going to face some challenges during this time period. Okay, they still control the Middle East. You can see this original pink area was part of the Ottoman Empire. They've expanded out to the lighter pink area. And what's going to happen is the Russians are looking at this area called Crimea, and that is the only area where they could potentially get access to the Mediterranean and thus the Atlantic Ocean, because they don't have any other territory that gives them access, especially during the winter, to the Atlantic Ocean. So they're going to challenge the Ottomans. The Russians are going to challenge the Ottomans for control of Crimea. And then the British are going to challenge the Ottomans for control of Egypt as well. So what ends up happening is we get a little war called the Crimean War, where the Russians are going to attack the Ottomans in 1853, so just before the U.S. Civil War. Russia again wants to gain access to trade routes through the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea all the way into the Atlantic. This would give them a better balance of trade. It's also the idea of geopolitics coming in there. However, Russia is going to be defeated because the British and the French are going to join with the Ottomans. The British and the French don't want to see Russia kind of rise in power because they're the powerful ones. They want to keep it that way. So Russia is going to end up losing that. So that's the big challenge to the Ottomans. Okay, here's another map. You can see Crimea here. They have two major battles. There are ships coming in to help from Great Britain, France, and the Kingdom of Sardinia, because Italy is not unified yet, 1853. They're going to unify in the 1860s and 70s. Austria is coming in and helping, and that's going to lead to another little issue fighting over this area known as the Balkan Peninsula. We'll get there. So, other aspects of geopolitics is the Suez Canal that I mentioned. Okay, you can remember it, SC equals Suez Canal equals shortcut. It's the canal that joins the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. It's going to originally be built primarily by French investors. However, the French investors go bankrupt, and so the British take it over. And it's going to allow the British faster access to a certain part of the world. Okay, you can kind of see the original route that they would have to take is this red line to get from England all the way around the coast of Africa over to areas that they like to colonize, also known as India. And so instead of this entire long 16,000 kilometers trip, they can go this blue trip, which is 10,000 kilometers. So it's maybe going from like 3 months down to 2 months, or from 2 months down to a month. So it's speeding things up quite a bit. So faster access to India is what they want through this movement, through the Suez Canal, through control of the Suez Canal. Here's a picture from space of the Suez Canal. You can see this thin little line right here. That's the canal. It's 120 miles long. And then this part is the lake, and they've cut the lake to connect to the Red Sea, which is down here, and the Mediterranean up here. You can also see on this map, we have the Mediterranean. You can take a boat now from Cyprus all the way down to Saudi Arabia through the Suez Canal. So that's going to be another really important thing. On the other side of the world, in the early 1900s, we'll build the Panama Canal, which will, again, open up trade between the eastern and western coast of the U.S. So now that Britain has better access to India from the Suez Canal, they're going to use India as a colony, or gain India as a colony, and it's going to become the jewel in the crown, is what they call it, because it is Britain's most profitable colony. It makes the most amount of money for the British Empire. Now, originally, the East India Company, it was a Dutch company, but it was going to be taken over the British, so it becomes the British East India Company. And it has control of those Indian states as trading posts. Remember, Vasco da Gama came around Africa and set up all those trading posts, and then the British company gets involved in the 1700s and starts creating more trading posts. So we are continuing mercantilism. Okay, so for example, England takes all the raw materials from India. They send them through the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean, up to England. That's where the raw materials are turned into finished goods, like clothing, cloth clothing, and then you send all the finished goods back along this red path to India, and you sell all of the finished goods back to India. One of the products that India was most famous for was cotton. So India grew a lot of cotton, and that would be shipped raw cotton back to England, where they would turn it into thread, and then they would turn it into cloth and then clothing, and ship the clothing and the cloth back to India to sell. The other product that India grows is called opium. They grow poppies, which then opium is made from, and opium is a drug. And it was very popular in England among the upper class, and it was also very popular in China, which we will talk about later, and how China ends up having a little war with England because of the opium trade. Now, this may not be on your notes, but the East India Company, also known as the British East India Company, so let's add that in there, is going to control huge parts of India for about 100 years, between 1757 and 1858, and they are full of corruption. So that's another big thing to remember. You'll need to add this into your notes because they're not there right now this year, but next year they will be. And then this pink part is what the British East India actually officially controls. And then the Indian states are the lightest tan color, and they are run by individual princes, and sometimes the British East India sides with those princes, sometimes they don't, sometimes they play them against each other in kind of a realpolitik idea, but that is what's basically going on. Now, there are some positive impacts of British colonization through the East India Company, including modernization. So India gets a railroad, or lots of railroads. They get some factories for people to work in. They get better sanitation. So cities are going to start to have sewer systems and things like that, running water. And they get the telegraph, so that communication is easier for people between different areas of India. It also allows people to move around India rather than living in the same, 10 miles that you've lived your entire life. People can actually move across India. However, there are a lot more negative impacts of British rule. They're going to restrict Indian industries. So, for example, the Indians don't make their own cloth anymore, their own style of cloth. If they do work in a factory to make cloth, they're going to be making a European style of cloth. There are also going to be a lot of famines where they can't feed their families because they're growing cash crops for England. So, for example, you can't eat cotton, and yet they're forced to grow cotton, and they can't really grow the food that they would eat. So that's going to be a problem. Traditional culture is going to be threatened. The Indians are encouraged to become more like the British. They're encouraged to dress like the British. They're encouraged to eat British food and speak English and go to British schools and all of that kind of stuff. And then the overriding European political and economic control, where the Europeans make all of the rules. At the beginning, the British East India Company uses indirect rule. So remember that with indirect rule, they are going to use the locals to enforce everything, but the Europeans are still making all of the laws, and that's going to lead to a lot of problems. So what happens when you have resistance against European influence? How do the natives resist all of these, resist imperialism? They're going to do two things. The first thing they're going to do is violent rebellions, or wars. And the second thing is the rise of nationalism. They're going to form nationalistic groups. Let's change that. That would be a better way to say that. And we'll raise that up a little bit. Nope, good thing. I missed the typing. And so they're going to form nationalistic groups that are going to help join together in order to promote Indian self-rule. Now, one of the first things that happens for our example of violent rebellions is going to be called the Sepoy Mutiny. native soldiers called sepoys used by the British East India Company are going to rebel against Western influence because the Westerners are using a new type of gun where that uses a cartridge, kind of like you may have heard of those muskets from the Civil War or from the Revolutionary War, where you pull off the top and then you pour the gunpowder down and then you ram the bullet down. Well, the story goes that these new cartridges were coated with grease to help them slip down the barrel of the gun, and the grease was pig or cow fat. And the native sepoys were not Christian, like the British were, and they were either Muslim or Hindu. Well, Muslims don't touch pigs because they're filthy. That's part of their religious belief, and so they don't eat pork or bacon or anything like that. And the Hindus don't touch cows because that's part of their religious belief. And so you having to open it with your mouth, you get the grease in your mouth, and so that was not okay for them to do. So they're rebelling against this. However, the rebellion has a lack of unity. There are a couple massacres in it, like at Kanpur. But it's not successful overall. Okay, there's going to be a lot of violence, a lot of rebellions, but it's not going to be overall successful. However, the British then determine that the British East India Company is no longer able to sufficiently rule, and so the British Crown is going to take over, and this period is known as the Raj, or British direct rule. So they kick out the British East India Company and dissolve the company, and now the Queen is the ruler of India, and no longer just the British East India Company. Now in class, we watched a quick video. It's here. If you want to type that in, open up another web browser. I will also try and link it, remember to link it on Blackboard, but we also read a little Horrible Histories chapter, which I will try and link on Blackboard as well. So try and go get those so you understand the Sepoy Rebellion a little bit better. It's about a 9-minute video. So the British India, you can see what Britain controls. It's increased from that original map. So this is the extent of British control during the Raj period. And so we've gone from indirect control, like the British East India Company, where the local government officials are still used, to direct control under the British Crown. And this is one of the few times that Britain actually uses direct control in their colonies. Eventually they'll go back to indirect control, but not yet. So the second way that we talked about rebelling against European influence is forming the nationalistic groups. And so with the rise of nationalism, we're going to see the Indians form what's called the Indian National Congress. This is a group that is calling for reforms and self-government, so they want to rule themselves and make their own laws. And one of the leaders is going to be our friend named Gandhi. He is going to work as a lawyer in South Africa and then eventually come back to India and support the fight for Indian nationalism and independence. So Gandhi is going to be a very powerful influence. He uses nonviolent protest. If you click on the link that is his name, then you will see a short video, short biography of Gandhi. And so he's going to be very influential to help gain independence, but they don't get it until after World War I and World War II. So it's going to take a little while, but eventually the Indians do get it. So that is the extent of India and the Middle East. We will stop here, and there will be another video for Asia and the final effects.